There have been a few renaissances in anime filmmaking since the inception of the medium. For example, the 1980s saw anime films with large budgets and innovative original concepts come to the forefront in a way that legitimized the entire medium. And nowadays, we're going through our own renaissance with anime films bearing the brunt of critically acclaimed endeavors at most studios. But a period that almost nobody talks about in terms of revolutionary anime filmmaking is the early to mid-2000s, more specifically a period that spans from around 2001 to 2007. In this short time frame, auteur creators, both old and new, were given unprecedented amounts of money and time to create what could very well be some of the most risky and artistically meritorious anime films in the medium's history. Combine this atmosphere with the rise of new and innovative animation technology, and you have a period akin to the Wild West, with old and new combining in a way that lacked set rules and resulted in some truly amazing films. Today, I'm going to be digging deep into 4 films from that era, while also touching on many more in order to paint a full picture of the anime film renaissance of the 2000s. Our first film is Rintaro and Katsuhiro Otomo's Metropolis, released May 26, 2001 and animated by Studio Madhouse. Those of you familiar with film history will know that the first film named Metropolis was directed by German expressionist filmmaker Fritz Lang, which was released in 1927 and became a pioneering science fiction work of the silent film era. Those of you familiar with manga history will know that the so-called god of manga, Osamu Tezuka, released a manga of the same name in 1949, which also became a pioneering science fiction graphic novel despite having no relation story-wise to Fritz Lang's film. It's these two primary sources that were used to create 2001's Metropolis, with Tezuka's classic designs and art style being combined with some directorial mimicry of techniques used in Lang's time and modern anime storytelling sensibilities to create something that feels far ahead of its time, but grounded in classic filmmaking tradition. This combination would have been impossible without director Rintaro and screenwriter Katsuhiro Otomo, whose contributions to this film set up a trend common during this era of anime filmmaking. Big-name creators from previous generations continuing to innovate during this one. Rintaro, real name Shigeyuki Hayashi, is as close to anime royalty as anyone I'm going to mention today. He began his career directing the original Astro Boy anime all the way back in 1963, and went on to direct pivotal series and films in anime's early days, such as Space Pirate Captain Harlock, Galaxy Express 999, and Harmageddon. Screenwriter Katsuhiro Otomo needs basically no introduction, as he created the critically acclaimed manga Akira and directed its feature film adaptation in 1988, a film that to this day basically sets the standard for anime filmmaking. The combination in their talents resulted in a production that feels both grounded in the past and brought back from the future, at least viewing it through the lens of the time period when it was released. Stunningly animated 2D animation coexists alongside sweeping uses of 3D CGI in ways that just aren't seen anymore in anime. While nowadays the majority of 3D CGI in anime is used to try and mimic the look and feel of 2D animation, in Metropolis and many other films of this period, its look is in many ways distinct and unfiltered, creating a disjointed visual style that is very much in tune with Metropolis's comparison of robots and humans. While Metropolis would be one of the last films Rintaro would direct, Katsuhiro Otomo would finally make his directorial follow-up to Akira in 2004 with Steam Boy. Despite it failing to make back its massive $20 million budget at the box office and critical reception both in Japan and the West being lukewarm, Steam Boy still carries a lot of the same production DNA as Metropolis, including its plentiful use of 3D CGI and computer animation to achieve its clockwork look. Just a few months later, on July 20th, 2001, Spirited Away was released, directed by Hayao Miyazaki and animated by Studio Ghibli, a director and studio of such worldwide import that they need no introduction. In fact, Spirited Away is not only the most internationally popular anime Ghibli ever produced, it's also to this day the highest-grossing film of all time in Japan. Not just anime, the highest-grossing film. So it's because of this that some of you might be wondering why I'm even mentioning it in this context, but Spirited Away holds significance for this time period both in the context of Miyazaki and Ghibli and of anime filmmaking as a whole. After directing Princess Mononoke in 1997, which saw the staff at Ghibli already experimenting heavily with computer animation, Miyazaki had 2 proposals rejected by the higher-ups at Ghibli before being given the go-ahead to make Spirited Away. Emboldened by the success of using computer animation in Princess Mononoke, Miyazaki and his staff utilized the newly released 3D modeling software Softimage to gently enhance many aspects of the film's animation and direction. These are evident in several shots involving dynamic 3D backgrounds, rotating 3D objects in the foreground and background of shots, and point-of-view running shots. The result was far more subtle than the extreme CGI splendor of Metropolis, but was no less significant since to this day Spirited Away remains perhaps Miyazaki's most significant experimentation with modern computer animation. Ghibli's use of computer animation software compared to the other studios at the time is also emblematic of their ethos as a studio, using it more to enhance the storytelling than to serve as a technological showcase. After Spirited Away, Miyazaki and Ghibli would begin to once more move away from 3D CGI use in their films, with 2004's Howl's Moving Castle seeing computer animation used more to ease production logistics than enhance storytelling, with staff artists even going so far as to hand-paint background art before digitizing it. Despite this, Spirited Away remains representative of a period that saw even the notoriously tech-shy Miyazaki experimenting with new technologies, and is so popular and far-reaching that it could partially be credited for kicking off the anime film renaissance of the 2000s on its own. The 2000s were a time when anime films were given some of the largest budgets seen up until then, and on March 6, 2004, a film perfectly representative of that trend was unleashed on the world, Mamoru Oshii's Ghost in the Shell 2: Innocence. Most of you will know Oshii from his directing the original Ghost in the Shell film in 1995, and is regarded as one of the most significant and artistic anime filmmakers alive today. Ghost in the Shell 2 saw Oshii directing his first animated film since the original Ghost in the Shell film almost 9 years earlier, and was a massive production that was split between the original Ghost in the Shell studio Production IG and a studio you've already heard a significant amount about, Studio Ghibli. The film's group of sponsors, commonly known as a production committee, was also fittingly quite large, including publishing company Tokuma Shoten, Nippon TV, advertising firm Dentsu, Disney, the Mitsubishi Corporation, and Toho, who distributed the film. While budget isn't necessarily an automatic indicator of quality with anime, Ghost in the Shell 2's deep pockets resulted in a hybridized production, again typical of the era, with heavy use of experimental 3D CGI technology throughout, layered under countless examples of beautiful 2D animation. Some scenes are even almost completely rendered using 3D CGI, such as the opening credits sequence and the now famous parade sequence, based on a procession at a Taiwanese temple. Suffice to say that every scene in Ghost in the Shell 2 looks expensive. Ghost in the Shell 2 is also incredibly strange, cerebral, and experimental, especially when you consider that it's supposed to be, or is at least billed as, a sequel to the original 1995 Ghost in the Shell film. Perhaps the biggest risk taken by Oshii here is the choice to make Bato the main character instead of the Major, who technically doesn't even appear in the film at all. This could partially be because originally Oshii wanted to make Ghost in the Shell 2 a standalone film simply called Innocence, with no outward relation to Ghost in the Shell at all. The film's visual style also differs significantly from the first, eschewing the original 80s Hong Kong-influenced look for wild swings between dank cyberpunk, Eastern religious, and even artistic steampunk imagery. Add all this to the film's third act, which features maybe one of the most purposefully disorienting and mind-bending sequences I've ever seen in a film, and you have a recipe for something supremely strange with ample opportunity to screw it up. Thankfully, however, this is Mamoru Oshii we're talking about, so the final product is easily one of the best and most artistically significant anime of the 2000s, and its reception shows that fact. It won Best Sci-Fi Film at the 2004 Nihon SF Taisho Awards and competed for the Palme d'Or Award at the Cannes Film Festival. The first animated feature ever to be shown in the official selection and only the sixth ever to be featured at Cannes at all. While you won't see Ghost in the Shell 2 on many breathless best-of lists because it's overshadowed by the importance of the first film and, frankly, because it's so damn weird, it's perfectly emblematic of this renaissance that I'm trying to describe. Oshii, a creator who made his name in the 80s and 90s, using lots of money and experimental new technologies in an environment that lacked complete norms for their use, to put together something that could only have existed then. Artistic, experimental, and, in its own way, beautiful. An anime filmmaker who was having his own personal renaissance in the early to mid-2000s was the late Satoshi Kon, writing and directing the critically acclaimed Millennium Actress in 2001 and Tokyo Godfathers in 2003, as well as directing the Paranoia Agent TV series in 2004, all of which are regarded as classics in their own right. In 2006, he would write and direct his ultimate masterpiece, Paprika, animated at Studio Madhouse on a budget a fraction the size of all the other movies I've talked about so far. That last fact serves to back up my earlier assertion, one that many industry professionals and commentators alike will tell you, that a high budget doesn't necessarily equate to a good anime. And this is because Paprika looks simply fantastic. Like Spirited Away, it takes a very subtle approach to melding the commonplace 3D CGI with traditional 2D animation, doing it better than maybe any other film I'll mention today. It serves more than anything to contribute to the perspective warping nature of all the dream sequences in Paprika, ones that were so cerebral and affecting that they significantly influenced Christopher Nolan when making the dream thriller Inception in the late 2000s. Paprika, on the whole, is probably Kon's most psychedelic and appropriately dreamlike work, and a lot of credit for that should go to Kon's singular vision present throughout production. Kon was famous for pouring his heart, soul, and most importantly life into his works, and Paprika was no exception, with Kon not only writing the screenplay and directing, but also drawing up incredibly detailed storyboards and even hand-checking key animation. Credit should also go to Paprika's soundtrack composer Susumu Hirasawa, who composed easily one of the weirdest and most unhinged soundtrack albums I have ever heard made for an anime, the production of which is just as strange as the content itself. It was one of the first film scores to use a Vocaloid, namely Yamaha's Lola English Vocaloid, and was sequenced entirely through an Amiga 4000, which is a computer first released in 1992. Keep in mind, this is a film from 2006. Paprika toured the International Film Festival circuit, garnering significant acclaim that it enjoys to this day, making its world premiere at the Venice Film Festival and then traveling around the world, even making a stop just an hour south of where I live at the Sarasota Film Festival in 2007, something I am still bitter about missing to this day. While Paprika was not supposed to be Satoshi Kon's last feature film, Kon died tragically in 2010, leaving his last work, Dream Machine, permanently unfinished, and Paprika his final long-form work. While many of us still feel grief at Kon's loss, I am incredibly glad that he was able to take risk after risk with his filmmaking, of which I think Paprika was the biggest, with the largest payoff. He worked harder to make good on the experimental atmosphere of the 2000s than perhaps anyone else. These four films weren't the only ones driving the creative explosion in anime films during this time period, and there's way too many to name here, but here are some significant additions to the list. Hiroyuki Imaishi had his directorial debut at Gainax with Dead Leaves in January of 2004, an explosively animated and radioactively energetic film that runs just under an hour but feels much shorter than that. It introduced the world to Imaishi's specific Western kids cartoon influenced style of direction that we would see more refined versions of in Gurren Lagann and Kill la Kill. Devilman Crybaby and Ping Pong the animation director Masaki Yuasa saw his feature film directorial debut later that same year with Mind Game, an insane masterpiece anthology film animated by Studio 4C, a studio we'll be hearing a lot about in this section. The film's visual style swings wildly between each disparate section, giving the viewer the impression of a mixed media piece rather than a traditional anime, and would begin to solidify 4C's reputation for making experimental anime art films. Makoto Shinkai, director of Your Name, a key film in the currently ongoing anime film renaissance, also had his feature film directorial debut even later in 2004 with The Place Promised in Our Early Days, a film which he also wrote, produced, edited, storyboarded, and provided cinematography for. While often overlooked compared to his later works such as 5 centimeters a second and The Garden of Words, The Place Promised in Our Early Days remains a remarkable tale of coming of age and childhood friendship set against sweeping examinations of war occupation, alternate history, and the multiverse. Studio 4C had another artistically significant success 2 years later in 2006 with Tekkon Kincrete, based on the Eisner Award-winning manga of the same name and featuring the first ever non-Japanese director of a major anime film, American Michael Arias. The film features, again, a very hybridized production with heavy and unconventional use of 3D CGI by today's standards, and a look that is very pan-Asian in its influences, taking architectural and design cues from cities in Japan, China, and Sri Lanka. Later that same year, Mamoru Hosoda would have his first shot at directing an original anime film in The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, which would win numerous awards including the prestigious Japan Academy Prize for Animation of the Year. It was loosely based on a 1967 novel by Yasutaka Tsutsui, who coincidentally also wrote the novel Paprika was based on. Despite directing 2 films before this one, including the immensely popular Digimon the Movie, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time was the first time the world would really see Hosoda's unique and emotional vision, telling a tale in a way only he could. Finally, in 2007, Studio Bones dipped their toe into the original anime filmmaking waters with Sword of the Stranger, an epic period tale set against conflicts between Sengoku-era Japan and the Chinese Ming Dynasty that became an instant classic and is easily one of the best anime action films ever made. Making a critically acclaimed international film festival run like almost all the other films in this video, it was directed by Masahiro Ando, who's gone on to direct TV anime like this year's Sirius the Jaeger, and features one of the most spectacular fight sequences I've ever seen in any anime for its final scene, animated in part by the legendary Bones animator Yutaka Nakamura. Well, we've come to the end of the video, and this is usually the point where I'd wonder about the future of anime filmmaking and where it's headed, but as of now, I think we can be secure in knowing it's headed in a positive direction. While the anime films of today lack the massive budgets and Wild West no-rules atmosphere of the anime films of the 2000s, they're making the rounds internationally in ways that no anime films could have back then, breaking box office records and winning awards along the way. They say, though, that all of today's works are built on the shoulders of those that came before, and that's certainly true for today's anime film renaissance. Without auteur creators, both old and new, experimenting with new technologies, pushing the limits of themselves and the industry as a whole, and changing the face of anime filmmaking as we know it, we wouldn't have the great anime films we have today. That is perhaps the greatest product of the anime film renaissance of the 2000s. Well, other than the films themselves, of course. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.